All right, testing 1, 2, 3. I think last week we had some questions coming from afar about whether the volume was too loud. So if the volume is either too loud or too soft, please email Susan and she can make an adjustment or let me know that we have the microphones right for your needs.
Okay, at home, if your volume is too high or too low, typically it is your device.
Okay.
That is something we don't have control over. I do, however, have control over the volume in the classroom, and I noticed that my microphone is very loud right now. So I'm going to adjust that. But if you're at home and it's too high or too low, go ahead and use the controls on whatever device you're on to adjust that.
All right. And there's nothing wrong with communicating with us while this is going on. Susan can read what you have to say. And in the room, if it's too loud or too soft, speak up, because we do have the ability to make it just right. We've got a lot of adjustments on all these fancy gizmos and we can get it right with a little reminders. Welcome to the second session of Before and After Humble Historic Homes of Holland. We're handing out today the map, and I'm told to stay in front of the camera. So this map is coming out to everyone. Those who are at home received it on an email, and it's being handed out in class. So if you're missing this, it's a treasure, don't miss it, because if you really squint or get your best glasses on, you can even see the house numbers on the houses that are in each district. So you can tell an exact address. And sometimes that's useful when somebody mentions a house and you can get it. Looking at things this week, I was again impressed with what a great job the city of Holland does, I think, in featuring our historic homes in everything that goes out to visitors. For example, here are a couple pages that came from the calendar a couple years ago, a collage of great porches, another collage of great porches, and not every city really features among things that people are alerted to, the houses. Even this magazine, which goes out in the visitor center downtown on 8th Street, and everybody picks up who visits Holland in a hotel or something, has great maps in it. Very detailed, street by street. And how many of you have been someplace where you're annoyed because the city doesn't really give you a good map when you come there so you can figure out where you are and what you want to see? I think Holland does very well, even in the dining guides and this and so forth. We're doing a pretty good job of showing people where things are and what they might want to visit. So today, Anna Minabal is going to first give us even more clarity on, well, wait a minute, we're good. No, I'm sorry. What we're doing today is going through specific before and after houses and then taking questions for either Anna or Anna Minabal or Amy Aldrich. So Amy is going to take us through the nitty gritty, the before and after, a little bit of nitty gritty if you're ready for that. And please feel free to put questions in the chat, or if you're in the room, raise your hand and we'll come around and get your questions. Okay, Amy. Okay, all right, that's right. Okay, I was a little vague on exactly what the order is here. Okay, so here we go with Anna Minabal, bringing you a couple of more points about. Yes, right, I'm sorry, you have a PowerPoint and everything. Okay, here we go.
No problem. All right, thank you, Linda. And again, my name is Anna, and I'm the preservation planner for the city of Holland. And I'm just going to take us through a couple of more points about historic preservation and why we preserve today. And then I'll be passing the mic over to Amy, who will be taking us through more specific properties here in Holland. So as a review, last week we talked about what does it mean for a house to be in the historic district. We learned more about the National Register, and we learned about what protections are involved when the home is listed or designated locally. We learned, like I mentioned, about those opportunities, those protections, what sort of resources are there. We also heard from Amy and learned about what Homecourt does and some of the properties they help with, what sort of grants and opportunities and assistance they offer to folks. And then we had the ability, took the time to look at some photographs of these properties, which we will be doing more of today. And so I just want to talk a little bit about why do we preserve old homes? what are some of the factors involved? There's environmental, economic, and cultural reasons why this is important. And a lot of the time, each of these overlaps with the other. So I'm just going to walk through today a few of these items. So first off, and one of the topics that I think is the most important is that preservation is a sustainable practice. This is a quote that you'll see sort of in different places. The National Park Service has it on their website, that the greenest building is the one that is already built. Is this idea of sort of recycling and reusing what we already have instead of starting over fresh and new. It takes 35 to 50 years for most new energy efficient homes to recover all of the carbon that was expended during their initial construction process. To explain this a little bit, this is talking about homes that are built with specifications that we would consider green today, which are very good. They're efficient over time, but it still takes a lot of initial energy to produce these buildings and these structures. And so that's something that needs to be taken into consideration when we're thinking of what is the best sustainable practice to do right now. For a home that was built 50 to 100 years ago, that energy has already been expended and that building is still here. And it would cost a lot of energy to take it down and start back over, even if the building you are rebuilding is more efficient on paper. So this idea is called embodied energy. And embodied energy is the energy that comes from creating the structure. So it's the extraction and processing of all the materials, the energy that's needed in transportation. Those materials are produced and then they need to get to the construction site. Assembly and all of the work that happens on the site itself. And so these are things that are often need to be considered when thinking about sustainable practices in building. And it's one way that preservation can really help us going forward. And then on a similar note, residential buildings do consume the largest portion of energy when thinking of energy consumption in this country specifically. But there are ways that historic buildings were built originally that allow them to offset some of these sort of the consumption that's involved. So to sort of explain that a little bit further, you can see in this graph here, which I'd like to know is showing commercial buildings, but it illustrates many of the same points I'm talking about, that buildings that were constructed before 1920 and even 1920 to 1945, by and large, do not use as much energy as more modern structures. And that's because they were built with a lot of environmental characteristics and sustainability ideas in mind, because that's just the way it had to be done 100 years ago when you didn't have air conditioning or the furnace and heating systems like we have today. So these buildings, for example, their windows, there was thought that went into where are the windows going to be? What size are they going to be? What direction are they going to be facing? The same with doorways and the other materials used to construct the home. So while we think about, oh, maybe, getting the nicest, newest thing today that is more energy efficient on paper, there are still really great aspects of these older homes that continue to serve this energy saving purpose today, even though that wasn't maybe the initial intent. Or here, let me take off my mask for a second. Sorry. Yeah, forgot about that. So even though there are energy efficient products today, and I don't want to discount that at all. It's really important, especially in new construction, that we're thinking about the planet. We're thinking about what the impact of these structures are going to be in the future. But that doesn't entirely discredit what we already have and the importance of these buildings. So, and I wanted to just clarify, I talked about the embodied energy on the other slide. Operating energy is what I'm referring to here. This is the energy that we put out in the daily life of a building. So heating and cooling is going to be one of the main forms of this. It's probably what a lot of you are familiar with. That's what, it costs a lot to heat and cool your home. And so that's sort of the main energy output. And moving on to the next slide here, even or one thing that I see a lot working with the city and working with homeowners in the historic district are what things they can do to make their historic homes more energy efficient. And they have questions about, should I replace my windows? Should I replace the doors? What should I do to better protect my home from the elements? And often, usually repair and modifications to some of those original features are just as effective as those newer replacement options that you have for your home. But the issue with the newer ones is they sort of lose some of that historic character that we have on the properties. So for example, windows. I'm going to use windows as the main example because I think this is where it often comes into play. Original wooden windows are made from the old growth trees. That wood is far more durable. It lasts longer. It's a stronger wood if properly cared for over time. So yes, we do run across windows that have become rotten, that have fallen apart. But if painted, if caulked, if sealed, these windows can outlast many other aspects of the home, and especially products made from newer growth wood that we find today. So this is something we really encourage within the historic preservation field, that repairing these features can often be a benefit for the homeowner economically, but also a benefit for the home in the historic characteristics. And there are also adaptations that homeowners can do to make those windows a little bit more efficient. As I mentioned, you can caulk and seal them. There's weather stripping. Storm windows can be added. One sort of newer type of storm window goes on the inside of the building. You don't have to worry about it getting out there and attaching it to the outside. It doesn't take away from the look, but it provides a lot of the same energy and cost savings as a more modern 2-pane glass window. And you don't have to contribute to the larger carbon footprint of having that window produced, having that come to you and put it on your home. So this is something that's important for the larger community when talking about sustainability and how we can really think about the actions we're taking, but it also contributes to the look of the home, the look of the neighborhood, and the feel and function of your property. So last week we talked about rehabilitation, and that with historic preservation, our focus is not preserving each home as a museum piece to look exactly as it did back in 1880, but instead to find a compromise and a nice balance between the functional aspects of today and the historic look and character of the past. The other point I'd like to talk about are property values. We also discussed this a little bit last week. And I believe passed out right before class was the local historic districts and property values in the city of Holland, Michigan booklet. It should also have been made available to those online. There's a digital copy. It can also be found on the City of Holland's website. This was a study, that the city had done in 2017, 2018, which was a bit before my time at the city, but it's still an excellent resource today. It went through and compared the home values of the original Holland Historic District, the Washington Boulevard Historic District, and then compared it to the non-designated or the properties that are nearby, but not in one of the historic districts. So if you look in that booklet, there's a map on the front cover, or there's the map that was also passed out. So it's comparing the homes that are in color here to the ones that aren't, the beige areas. So a lot of the residences located in the area of the map that's not highlighted are very similar to, of the same age and of the same type of housing that's in the historic district, but they just lack that designation. Yes. I do not. And I think that would be really interesting because something we've seen is a huge increase in the market and the value of homes. And so that's not something I know. What this study focused on was sort of coming out of the economic depression of 2008 and how that affect home, the price and the value of homes. So I think another maybe not an entire study, but another look at, okay, now that we've had basically the opposite happen, how could that affect the property? So I don't have that information right now, but I agree it would be very interesting to see and learn more about. What this study found is that it takes a little bit of time to see, but that historic districts have positive impact on the property values, the homes within them. So in the booklet, it describes it in quite a bit more detail, but there were some control values or some things that were held common across the homes. And then that was used to compare the properties into the historic district to those that were not in the historic district. And you can see on this graph here that our district that's been established the longest, the Holland Historic District, which was established in 1986, has seen this property values rise significantly over time compared to the non-designated areas. And then the Washington Boulevard Historic District, which is a little tricky to see color-wise on this map here, but it's this second lower orange line, is just now, or was then, it's been a few years now, starting to outpace the non-designated areas. And the Washington Boulevard Historic District was established in 2001. So just under 20 years after this one. So we expect similar, and of course now that might be shaken up a little bit, but similar growth. Additionally, as I mentioned, the study also looked at how the property value stayed during the economic downturns, and that it was shown that the historic district properties retained their value far better than the surrounding neighborhoods during the 2008 recession. So just another reason why historic preservation and having these old homes is really important to our community and other communities similar to us. And then lastly, just the cultural impact. I think this is one reason why a lot of us are here today. People genuinely like old houses. They're interesting. They're fun to look at. There's just a certain feeling to being inside of them. I like to call this the aura of the original. Again, my background is in museums, and this is something we talk a lot about when thinking about original objects, original documents and papers. There's just something about having the real thing there in front of you. You can look at a facsimile or a representation of something, but there's just something about it. And it's hard to put exact words on, but I'm hoping that many of you know about this feeling I'm talking about. And that's one reason why we see this interest in protecting old homes. Also, older buildings and neighborhoods create a sense of identity and collective memory. In Holland, I'm sure many of us have stories that we like to tell about the buildings we see, about, maybe you remember when this shop on 8th Street was another store, or you know someone who used to live in this house, or maybe you used to live in this house. My family, we have different things, even different stories about buildings that we've never been in. We don't know who owns them, but that's a landmark to us, and that's something we've talked about. And so this sort of collective group identity and memory are built into these buildings. And if they weren't here, we wouldn't have that to share and to talk about and to get excited about. And then lastly, heritage tourism. Heritage tourism is traveling to experience the different places, activities, and locations that represent the stories of the people of the past and present. So this is a very popular industry. It's a growing tourism industry. Over $171 billion are spent annually across the country. This is the United States. On heritage tourism. And it's something that we see here in Holland. We have the Eggplant House, we have the Settlers House as part of the Holland Museum that are popular properties for people to go and visit and see what life was like in another time. And Holland's ability to attract people for this reason, to come walk through our historic districts, see what the homes look like, kind of just take a little bit slower pace of life, is another really valuable asset to having these properties in our community. So then moving forward, I just want to acknowledge that each historic property is unique, and they each come with their own sets of opportunities and challenges. And by this, I mean, sometimes there are alternatives that are necessary when looking at preservation on a home. So I talked earlier a bit about repairing versus replacing original features. Sometimes if features weren't cared for over time, alternatives and replacements are necessary. And this is, again, part of that rehabilitation process. So I don't want to exclude any historic properties that are like that, but just say that the larger picture is looking at what we have that we can, from the past, that we can save and protect for the future. Right here, I have a photograph of the Washington School Green, right across from the new Washington School condos that some of you might be familiar with. So these are all homes that were new builds that were built to fit within sort of the design and feel of the historic district. And I think they provide sort of a really interesting thought and conversation piece about historic preservation going forward. Again, we don't want to create a history that wasn't there. These are very clearly new homes, but we can still sort of honor and respect our neighborhoods and sort of continue that feel moving forward. So again, just remember that rehabilitation is the goal. It's not complete restoration, and that we want to modify a property's needs to fit today while also preserving that historic character. And I'm hoping that that will lead nicely into what Amy has for you today and showing some before and after photographs of homes here in Holland. So thank you for listening to me for this first bit, and I'll pass it over.
Sure, we'll take a question while we're getting set up. No, go ahead.
Right. This is a question for you, Anna. As a part of the city, as we look at waterfront development and as this idea of the cruise ships coming in and actually spending some time here in the Holland area, is there any intent to develop some kind of a signed trail, historic trail through the district and downtown?
So not to my knowledge, though, I do think that would be a great idea. Developing the waterfront and the resources we have for visitors to our community is definitely a big focus of the city right now and something they're thinking about. So as of right now, we don't have a plan for that, but I think that could be something of interest in the future, definitely.
Great, thank you. And we will take questions like we did at the end last time, that you can store those up, and we'll have plenty of time. So just to review, I'm Amy Alderink from Homecourt. And what does Homecourt do? Last week, we talked about our two programs where one is we give grants to homeowners to help them fix up their home with critical repairs. And then the second is we renovate and sell distressed homes. And then we talked a little bit last week about what do today's buyers want in a new home. So how can we renovate old homes to have the new features that people are looking for? And then looked at examples of design challenges and opportunities. So then this week, given what Anna talked about, so given that there's environmental, economic, and cultural benefits of preserving homes, so those things are not in question. I think the question is then to what degree and how. So how do we preserve, and then how much do we preserve? So I wanted to just talk about a couple of practical tips and resources that I use when Homecourt buys a home. where do I go to figure out what to do? And of course, it always starts with budget. So you're working within the parameters that you have. But as Anna mentioned, the City of Holland has their historic preservation office resources that are very helpful. So it has district guidelines, it has how to repair windows. So 100-year-old wood single pane windows, step-by-step process, links to YouTube videos, all kinds of things on how to do that. Maps and studies. The City of Holland also has what's called their BSA online, where you can look up properties by either owner name, if you know it, by address, by parcel number. And you can look at when past building permits were pulled. So if you're wondering how old a roof is, if you're wondering, was electric ever updated in the last 30 years since they started keeping track of this online, you can see who owns a home, all kinds of interesting stalker kind of things that you can find on there. And then another place that I go is the library. So Anna showed you examples, and I'll pull up a picture about what you can find on each address within those designated areas, and then Sanborn fire maps. So an example of what those are, this top photo or web is a screenshot of the BSA online. So you'll see there's a photo of a home. This happens to be a house on 9th Street. And you'll see kind of right at the top of the information, the year built 1882. That often is not correct, but it's there if you wanna look. And then you'll see kind of the categories there that you can, the different tabs that you can see, whether it's property information. So that may just be the owner, tax information, building department information. If it's a rental, you can see different enforcement certificates and when they expire, all kinds of stuff. And that is available to the general public. So you can get lost for hours just doing that. Then the other thing is that map, the Sanborn fire insurance map. And Anna knows these, I'm sure, the history of these better than I do. I just know that if the city website says something was built in 1882, if I want to verify that, I can go to a Sanborn fire map and I can see when did the little box show up on the parcel. So of course, these little yellowish blobs are houses or buildings on pieces of property. So you can look at maps. This one is from 1902, and you can see when did a building first show up on that map. And that's often used to determine what the actual date of construction was. What's also interesting is the shape of the blobs will change over time because that kitchen got added to the back of the house. The carriage house got added to the property. So you can also see when things were added on to know if that was original to the home or later on. And then this is an example of the studies that are done for each of the contributing homes within the different historic districts. So these are very interesting. And these can be viewed on the website, and there's a hard copy of the city website. And there's also hard copies of these in a book at the library. So this, for example, again, the address 240 West 9th, it gives a little description of the house, what type it was. So this is saying it's a 2-story cross gable, Queen Anne, what type of foundation it sits on, the type of porch, and then the history. If for all you history people, you can even see who was recorded as the original owner. And then they take from the different directories, like I guess it'd be telephone directories over time. They show a list of who the different owners were from those different directories in time. So that's also fun because you see a lot of familiar names from, yeah. Yeah. So as Linda said, this original owner is attributed to Garrett Holland, and this home on 240 West 9th is right across from Holland Park. So there's probably a reason for that, although I don't know my history enough to know what. So then the pictures, this is the only picture, and it's like a copy of a copy of a copy. So they're sometimes hard to tell much, but you can at least see kind of what the general shape of the house was, maybe what the some of the materials were, where the doors were, where the windows were, that kind of thing. And then 3 other resources. So those are kind of more specific towards if I have a particular house and I want to know what it originally looked like and when it was built, so that I know kind of if I wanted to try to make it look like that again, where would I start? These are kind of more general information, and I have the 3 publications here if anyone wants to see them. But the first is the Field Guide to American Houses, and that's just very helpful for identifying when this this says a Queen Anne, what is a Queen Anne and what makes it a Queen Anne. And it gets into all the nitty gritty as far as window trim details, doors, all of that kind of stuff. Kind of the same type of thing as the Visual Dictionary of Architecture. And that's another one that talks about, okay, if somebody starts talking to you about a lintel or a window sash or a lot of terms for construction or historic details, you can find all of that with illustrations in that book. So that's another one. And then last but not least, I thought I'd throw this in, is the thickest book of them all. So the thickest book is this one, and this is the Michigan Residential Building Code. So once you have all of your ideas about what you think would be cool to do, you have to consult realty and say, what can we actually do? I know last week I talked about stairways, like inside homes, that if I can open them up just to let a little more daylight in, that's a great thing. But I often cannot mess with the actual geometry of the stairs, just because if I start changing the treads or the risers, the thing that you step on or the thing that goes up and down, you have to bring it up to today's standards. So if you're trying to make a pie-shaped stair just a little bit easier to step on, once you touch it, you have to bring it to today's standards. And it's very hard to fit today's standards in an old home because modern stairways take up way, way, way more space than an old one. So that is one example where reality sometimes impedes on what's fun. All right, a couple specific examples. So this is that house 240 West 9th. This is not a Homecourt house, but this is a home that I am working on the renovation right now, just because when Homecourt does not have as much to do, I take on additional projects for homeowners. So this is from that. So this is a home that was either built in 1882 or somewhere along the line between 1902, because it does show up on the Sanborn fire map in 1902. So the homeowners had owned the home for 15, 20 years and used it as an income producing property as a rental, with the idea that this was going to be their empty nester home. So now they're at that stage where they are putting in a significant investment to the home to make it their forever home. And we got to the basement, and they have kids that they would like to be able to come back and visit, and one's still in high school. So they needed that space in the basement. The basement is 6 foot tall. So that, according to my blue book, the residential code book and the city of Holland, you cannot use that space for anything except storage. So it's not legal to have a bedroom down there. It's not legal to have a bathroom. It's not legal to hang out there. And 6 foot is pretty uncomfortable. So my 6'6" son would not want to spend time down there. So then we looked at the options of what if we dug the basement down? The minimum height is 7 foot. So to have finished space in a basement, you need to have 7 foot of height. So the next question or the next thing was, well, can we do what's called underpinning? So you chip out the basement floor, you dig under the existing walls, you pour more wall to make the floor deeper. And the the 2 masons that I had come and take a look at the wall would not give me a price. They just said there was no way they were touching it. We were seeing daylight through the, this is what it looks like. So some parts of that are really cool. And you can see old 100-plus-year-old rocks. Well, obviously they're older than 100 years, but they've been in this place for 100 years. And we know that there's no footing under here. There's nothing. The wall just starts where you see it at the bottom of the picture. So nobody wants to dig under that and safely do so. So then the other thing is this one picture to the left shows the front porch that had a new block already put in. And then around the side of the house shows the condition of the block from the exterior. So it was a combination of block, rocks, mortar squished onto the top of it, imagination, spit, whatever happened along the years. So it was not, again, something that I thought and the customer thought was worthy of renovation. Making it, or restoration, I should say, because it was so far gone. There were so many different materials. It was not in pristine shape that had been lovingly maintained. It was frankly pretty unsafe. So what we do is we go prepare our application to the historic committee. And that's what this lot of print for the white on the white shows. Just saying kind of why we want to do this, the shape of the wall and what we want to replace it with. And the historic committee approved that. So what we did was we raised the house and poured a new foundation, new modern poured wall foundation under it. So you'll see on the left, there's big steel beams that were placed under the home and then lifted up gradually. And that wood kind of tower are stacking crates that they put, that they rest the steel beams on as it goes up in the air. And then the picture on the right shows the concrete forms that the poured wall guys came and put that in and poured the new wall and then poured the basement floor. And that was after a little mini excavator ran around under that while the house was raised up and hauled all the basement floor, the extra dirt, and dug down an additional 2 feet so we could get, 3 feet so we could get a 9-foot basement wall under there. So as Anna has said as well, is the historic committee doesn't want us to preserve this property under glass. We realize that things have, in some cases, outlived their lifespan and their usefulness. And if a homeowner wants to put a lot of investment into the home and wants a basement that they can use, that this is a reasonable alternative. And that when we put a new basement, we're not trying to make it look old. It's okay that it looks new. So it would not be appropriate for us to stick some fake brick on it on the outside, or to, I don't know, what was that from the 90s, like sponge paint the exterior to make it look old. They don't want us to do those kind of artificial things to trick people into this was here all along. It's no apologies, kind of, this is a new basement. And the rest of the house is still wood and a lot of features that we're not touching and that we're restoring, but the basement was not one of them. The question is, what is the cost of something like that? To raise the house was about 35,000, and then to put the new basement in was another 18. So it's a lot, but hopefully it'll be there another 100 years, and it's a very nice basement right now. So, and I don't have the after pictures because we're still finishing up in the next month, and then we need to wait for nicer weather to make it look really good with the paint and everything on the outside. But if you drive by today, you'll see that it's not floating up in the air. It is sitting on a new foundation. So the question then of how much to preserve. So a continuum, right, of preservation. You don't touch anything to new. How do we decide how far to go? Some guy, Joe, I don't really know who he is, but just something I saw and I wanted to give him credit was not whether, but how much. So we all agree to some extent that historic preservation is important for reasons Anna mentioned, and just that we know that that's a thing. So everyone will have different opinions on how much is appropriate, but it's not whether, but how much. So this is a house, a before picture for a house on College. So College is not, in this area, is not in a historic district. So there are not the rules. I don't have to go to the historic committee to ask if I wanted to raise this house up and put a new basement underneath. I wouldn't have to ask. I'd still have to get my building permits and do all of that, but there would not be a historic preservation component to it. So this front porch needed work. It doesn't look real nice. If I wanted to close that in and make it into a bedroom, there are still guidelines in the city that I would have to follow. It's called infill review. So if you, any other area in the city that kind of looks like historic district, but it's not historic district, so it looks like these kind of homes with front porches and is in this area, there are still rules to make sure it blends in when you're doing major things, and enclosing porches is considered a major thing. So what that prevents are some of the bad remodels that you may see driving around, is when you see a front porch that obviously at one point probably had a ton of character, windows, or maybe was open air, and you see it just all sided in with maybe one window. So the city, that was probably, I don't know, do you know when infill review happened? 15? I was on the planning commission at the time, but I don't remember. So it was recognized that even if something wasn't in the historic district, there were aspects of historic homes that were worth preserving, and front porches being one of them. So just so you know, it's just because you're not in the historic district doesn't mean there are no rules. So this shows the after. So again, not whether, but how much. So in the historic district versus not, I added a new rail, handrail, spindles, that kind of thing. But I did not have to ask the historic district what they should look like. So the beauty of that is that hopefully whoever's doing it has good taste and it looks better. But if you live in a condo or a condo association, you know that you cannot always plan on good taste. And what you think is good taste is not everybody else's good taste. So there are a lot of different things that could have been done with this rail that may not have looked very successful. So the beauty of the historic district and why I think property values are preserved is that there is policing of quote unquote taste. So, and here this, the home was covered in aluminum siding. So that's obviously not an original material for this home. Budget is what was considered here and waste. So like Anna said, the environmental impact of ripping off aluminum siding, not knowing what you were going to run into under that aluminum siding, and having to put something possibly new over what you just ripped off. I always try to consider, is it in good enough shape that if we paint it, it can look decent? And then a future owner, of course, can always decide what they want to do with it. But for Homecourt homes, especially where budget is always a very high priority, if the aluminum is in decent shape, not too dented up, not too cut up, I always will try to keep it on. And same with vinyl siding, just because you don't know what you're going to run into if you take it off. This is the interior of that same home. So for Homecourt, we have our fair share of hoarder homes that we take over. So this one was full basement, first floor, second floor, garage. There was one little path that you could walk through to get there. So we filled up 7 30-yard dumpsters full of stuff before we did anything. And that was after we donated everything usable to a couple of different local places. So whether it was furniture or bedding or whatever. So 7 30-yard dumpsters just of junk. So again, kind of the how far do we take it? The windows, I always try to keep them where they are because you always run into more problems trying to get creative and patching and siding, doing interesting things. So the windows along the back of the home were not at the ideal height for today's kitchen, but we just kind of made it work and made a little bit of the bottom of the window is covered from the inside, which you don't usually see, but it was worth it just to keep the windows in place. You'll see the wood floors in the bottom picture were under carpet and vinyl and different things. So they have some, not stains, but different discolorations, but they were sanded down, refinished, and are still a good selling point for people, even with some of the imperfections, because like Anna mentioned, people like the original. So there's just something about the original wood floors that people like, even if we consider them fairly rough, not perfect. And my wood floor guy has been doing this for 30 years. And it's always fun for him to show up on site because he can tell me exactly what type of wood it is and how old the tree probably was that they came down from, or that they came from. And so he'll walk in and say, oh, they're quarter sawn oak and they've been here 120 years. And it looks like the size grain that it is, there was probably a 300-year-old tree that was cut to make these. And I just think all of that information is fun. And I picture myself having a little dinner party and being able to talk about my wood floors that are not just modern wood floors. They have some history. This is a different home. Again, wood floors, the original pine. I don't think that they were probably ever intended to be a finished floor because they're not by any means fancy, and we're not fancy at the time, but they are popular. So the pictures to the left were what the kitchen was before. So it was, I think, apparently a 70s remodel. And the dishwasher is on wheels next to the stove. And so that's obviously not what you see in a modern kitchen now with no counter space. And So opened up, so that view to the stove is the same as the view to the right picture. So we opened up that wall, added a little raised bar where there was bar seating. And then the cabinets on the wall, the ones that are painted gray, the upper cabinets are the original that were just painted up and repaired. And the cabinets on the bottom are new. Here's another example. This is a house on West 16th Street and had been empty for a number of years. Oh, I should say that the hoarder house had been empty for 10 years. So it, I don't know if we've ever not found a dead cat in a hoarder house. So there's always a cat that somebody lost somewhere along the way. So that, so this house on 16th Street had been empty for a couple of years, and all of the original stuff on the exterior of the home has been covered by siding along the way, so we weren't really sure what was underneath. The front porch, as you can see, does not have an entrance to the front. It opened to the side. So we started taking stuff off, and as you may recall from last week, I was hoping this was that one time where I'd take siding off and everything was perfect underneath, and it didn't happen. So I still haven't had that experience where I get to take something off and it's perfect and I just need to put a little paint on it. So this one had those holes all along where insulation had been added at one point. It was a stucco exterior over lath board, which you usually see inside a home. I've never seen that lath board on the outside of the home. So was not a real durable product when we started taking stuff off. And then on the bottom right, you'll see that the porch, we reworked so that there's a new stairway coming to the front instead of that entrance to the side. So this is the final product. So unfortunately, this wasn't one where the budget was limitless and I could just put new wood up top where there had been shakes and I couldn't just re-stucco. I just covered everything up with vinyl siding. So this is not in the historic district. So I could do vinyl siding, I could do vinyl windows, rework the porch, all of these things, and make this home, I think when all was said and done, was sold for $190. So it's not a home that I could have put easily $50,000 into the exterior if I wanted to try to restore it with wood. So that would not have been possible on that budget. This is the home right next door, just to the west of the blue house that we just looked at. And the picture on the left is the before, so we called it the Eggplant House. So it was purple and green. And once we purchased it, the children and grandchildren of the original owners reached out to me because they were curious and wanted to see what the house looked like, wanted to know what we were doing. Again, that history that people just think it's cool that they shared pictures of Thanksgiving dinners and of their family inside the house. And it was really cool to see what the house looked like originally that I don't usually get the chance to see. So they gave me that picture to the upper right, which shows their grandparents in 1915, standing outside the house. And it was the house that they themselves built. The window, that first window, oh, I have a pointer. This window was a wedding gift. It's a leaded glass transom window. So that was a wedding gift that they incorporated into their brand new house in 1915. So even though the picture was black and white, in the lower right is then the kind of paint scheme that I thought, well, I don't know exactly what colors those were, but it wasn't purple and green. So I thought that's a cool opportunity that I can paint it any color I want because we were keeping the wood siding. It was in good shape. And being able to see what it was originally, it seemed like a cool opportunity to try to duplicate what was there. So we painted and restored the wood windows, and most everything on this house stayed original versus this one all new. So again, not weather, but how much, and each house is different. How much can we do? And then that's the after. So the pictures on the left are also the afters, showing, yeah, the floors were restored, trim was restored, the leaded glass windows in the dining area with the bench on the lower left. So there were a lot of cool things on this one that had been kept up over the years. So it was a much easier restoration than some. This one is a favorite because it's the house that has been vacant for the longest of one that I've worked on. So it was vacant for 40 years. Not 4, but 40. So this house is on East 17th Street, just west of Columbia. And the wife I talked to at the closing. So the house was listed finally by a realtor. I never met the seller until we were sitting at the closing table, and I had to ask her, like, why have you owned this house for 44 years and never done anything? And she said her husband bought it 40 some years ago and was sure that he was going to fix it up and they were going to move into it. and she said, no, we're not. And he kept thinking he was. And he gradually started painting some rooms and did some things over the 40 years. But she just said that every time the tax bill came, she would get angry at him. And they never did move in. And he had passed about 2 years prior to that. So I think she was still a little angry at him, but it had been vacant for 40 years. And my drywaller lives just down the street, and he in the house that he grew up in, and he's 47-ish. And as soon as he started working on this house, he said, ooh, the spooky house. And I said, why is it the spooky house? And he said, well, when we were little, we would be riding our bikes down the sidewalk and we'd always have to speed up when we went in front of this one because it was the spooky house. So even, 30 some years ago, it was empty and spooky. So 30 years later, it was really empty and spooky. So this is what it looks like now. So wood siding, so just a lot of paint, a new roof, and it's a pretty cute house. It was even pretty cute then if it didn't have moss on the roof, and just need a lot of paint. And that is it. So I'll go back to some pictures in front of us. So what questions do you have for Anna and I? Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. In one of the earlier pictures, where you had the porch that you did, I should have written down the street, but I didn't. You took the railings off, the steps leading up to the porch. There we go.
Yeah.
Which house is that? 429 what?
College.
College. Okay, I'm sorry. But beside the steps, it looks like there should be handrails.
Yeah, the city treats these differently. So when they have these little brick wing walls on the side, they don't always make me put handrails on. Okay. And then I usually wait and see if the buyer wants them on or not, because adding a handrail in this situation is not easy.
And it's certainly attractive this way.
Yeah. So to add a handrail, just because of how it would have to tie in with the top, it would have to be surface mounted to the steps. And then when I do that, it obviously makes the area less wide that you're walking on. So there's kind of a trade-off of if you add the handrail, you have less room to step, but you have the handrail. So,
Thank you.
yeah.
I knew there'd be a good answer.
Anyone else? Or questions from home? I'm not sure how to get those. One.
I'm just curious. Will the city of Holland at some time expand the historic district to include what's now blue?
I will let Anna answer that.
So what do you mean by what's now blue first, just on the map or the non-designated area?
I'm sorry. Yeah, I did have a mic, but.
Yeah, so there are, so the question was about if there are any plans to expand the historic district into what in the property values booklets in blue or are non-designated properties. Right now, there are not any plans in the works to do this. However, we are always open to more surveys to see what's their possible future designation, but this is something that would need to come up from the community. It's not something that myself working at the city can say, yes, we're going to go do this, because we want community investment and interest in what we're doing. We don't want to force a historic district upon an area that doesn't want it. We're really looking for sort of a grassroots movement. So it's something that I, as the preservation planner for the city, would love to see, but there's also other factors involved in where we need to see some support before moving forward with a project like that. So good question, though.
Thank you. I have a couple comments in the chat, and I was kind of passively listening while I was working on some other things. You may have already addressed the handrail issue from Ann Weller, that she noticed that some of them don't have hand railings. Is there a reason? You've addressed that. And then she added, when we wanted to add a handrail in the historic district, the former committee said it had to be wood. We took multiple photos of other historic districts' homes with wrought iron railings and eventually got permission to add that. So it's just a comment. And I don't have anything else in chat right now.
Okay. And just speaking with handrails specifically, my big thick blue book says one thing, and then the city has different codes in some situations that take precedence over that. So the city's interpretation is as soon as you have 4 risers or above, you need a handrail. So if you would count here, this is 1, 2, 3, 4. So when the sides are unprotected, I would need 4. I would need a handrail once you get to 4. And then a guardrail is a totally different thing. So this spindle rail is considered a guardrail to keep you from falling off. Once you're 28 inches above grade is when you need a guardrail. So if this porch was a low porch within 28 inches of the grade, you would not need a guardrail. And then as you can see, the photo on the left was what was required. So sometime in this, 10 years or so that the previous owner owned the home, the city probably drove by and said, hey, that's an unsafe situation. You need to add a guardrail. And they said, great, we can do that. And they did that. So that's what I mean by interpretation and taste, is that satisfied the requirement. So you can do that if you're not in the historic district. So.
This is for Amy. You talked about the cats, but have you ever found any treasure?
I so wish that I had. I didn't take any pictures, but no, the short answer is no. So the first couple of houses where things were left behind besides pianos, I would be kind of excited, like I'm going to go through this and I'm going to find some good stuff. And then I realized there's nothing there. And yeah, even the houses that have been that full of stuff, you would think there'd be something good. And there was enough things that were donated and I'm sure were used for furniture and that kind of thing. But I haven't stumbled across any bags of gold or anything. I must say that there are a lot of houses in Holland that have dirty magazines in the attic. So if you're ever doing a renovation and you don't want somebody to find your dirty magazines, clear them out of the attic because that's where they always are.
Don't send the kids up there to play.
No. So that's where they always are. Another, I guess, two interesting anecdotes is 2 houses in a row. We were opening up walls and found a kid's shoe, just one kid's shoe from like early 1900s, a little leather shoe with buckles and stuff that you could tell it wasn't a modern shoe, but just one. And it was in a place that we just had no idea how a kid could get a shoe in there. And so of course I went to the authority of Google and said, why would an old shoe be in a wall? And I learned that that was considered good luck, that when builders were building, they would put an old shoe in the wall as a good luck symbol. And I did not know that. Did you know that?
I did not know that.
Yeah. So if you're ever doing a remodel and an old shoe falls out of the wall.
But was it
why.
a wooden shoe?
It was not a wooden shoe. And then the second anecdote is the only other treasures we seem to find is there's always a creepy baby doll that's left behind. And so my subcontractors usually get a big kick out of having a mascot for every house. So whatever baby doll, G.I. Joe, Barbie, whatever was left behind ends up getting moved around from location to location in the house, sometimes ends up in the plumber's truck to take home. And so the little mascot usually gets passed around just for fun. But they're usually pretty rough for wear, like they've been through a lot once what the figures have. So any other? I have a question here.
Are there ever communities, areas in the city that maybe some of the homeowners would like it to be a historic district but others don't because of costs, et cetera, involved?
So that's definitely a possibility. So I started in this position this past summer. So I'm still sort of coming up to speed on things like that, the sort of the interworkings of all of the different communities and neighborhoods in the city and then within the historic district. So I think it's definitely possible. Again, I know I keep saying it. I don't know of any at this very moment. When the Washington Boulevard Historic District was designated back in 2001, if anyone was around in Holland during that time, there were some similar feelings to that. The historic district, it was sort of established and then it went back for a revote, and the city members or citizens, the residents of the city were all able to supply their vote on whether or not they thought it should be a historic district or not. So that was a process that was used with that historic district. And it's something going forward, that we've kept in mind and have been thinking about when looking at future historic districts, the potential.
That's interesting. The booklet that we handed out today does discuss that a little bit, that when some of the historic districts were organized, it was a few of the residents thought it was a good idea and they began to talk to people and have meetings and kind of sell the idea, the pros and cons, and cover it with their neighbors to get them interested and clear away misconceptions about what it is. So it can change. I was wondering, when a district is proposed for a historic district, Is it the voters of all of Holland who decide whether that's going to be a historic district or just the residents of that district?
Yeah, so to get started, it would be just the interest of the residents in that district. And it will actually be city council that will make that final vote on whether or not it's a historic district. With the Washington Boulevard district, it was a little bit of a special situation with having the vote sort of recalled and then brought forward to the city as a whole. But so it's really the residents who live there, that's the voice we're looking for,
Okay.
and the folks that have the most input.
Did I see another hand over here?
I was on the committee of the original historic district.
Mhm.
I think it took us like over 3 years to do all the research using that one book you showed. That was our handbook,
Yeah.
and made up all the cards that got sent to Lansing. And we were so thrilled that the Holland City Council passed it on the first proposal.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think people actually really knew what it was all about. They just thought, oh, that's a good idea, we'll pass that. But then later, what happened in Washington, that area. But then the residents in the city overvoted their
Mhm.
negatives.
Mhm.
Yeah. But what I was wondering was, where could I see the original cards? Are they online?
So are you
applications.
thinking of
The application.
the applications?
Yeah.
So we have the survey sheets, which Amy shared. Those are, I have at City Hall, and I'd be happy to share with anyone who's interested, sort of our quote originals of those. They are still copies, they're typewritten copies, and we
Right.
have the
Yeah.
original photographs that were also taken. But I don't have, to my knowledge, at least, like the field notes per se that were collected. It's something I can look for. We definitely have the
I'm
files
just
out there.
curious.
Yeah,
I remember
yeah.
working on some of them, but I don't remember each one that I worked on.
Oh.
But then this committee was actually formed through the Netherlands Museum.
Okay.
Willard Wickers,
Mhm.
he was kind of in charge, and then he asked people, I worked there at the time, and asked anybody interested in working on that. And I think we had about 8 people that worked on it.
Oh, that's excellent. A lot of the original study sheets, the forms that were written for the original district have the name of the recorder on them.
I'd
So
love
if
to
you're
see
ever
them.
interested and see if your name is on there,
Right.
my great aunt was one of the recorders, and so I'll see her
who was
name.
that?
Marcia Lanekeek.
Oh, yes.
Yep, so
yes,
her-
Oh, yeah.
Her name will be on them, and that was
Yeah.
something I discovered when I started in this position, that
Yeah,
I had a
and Barb
connection.
Ferguson, she was another one.
Yep.
Barb Ferguson.
Mhm.
In fact, one of your opening slides, that was her home.
Oh, excellent.
that
Yeah, see,
second
there's
home
all
from
these
the corner.
connections.
Right, yeah.
So
And
this
then-
is one of the sheets from the Washington Boulevard survey. So it was the third survey after the addition to the Holland Historic District that was done. So this one doesn't include, I don't think, the name of the person, but those first ones
Mhm.
did. Mhm.
And then after that was completed, a year or so later, we got a grant to do downtown.
Yes.
So then we
Yeah.
worked on the downtown. Yeah, it was awesome.
Thank you for sharing. This is so helpful for me to hear this information from you as well. So thank you.
I have a couple more questions in the chat. Is the house on College on the corner of 20th and College?
Yes. Yes, it's on the corner of, I think it's 20th or 19th is that one. Yeah. 429 College. So
Okay, thank you. This is directed to Amy. Do you only work on homes that you are buying to rehab and resell? Or do you work on homes where the owner is interested in upgrading the property?
So 2 answers to that question. So most of the homes that I do are for Homecourt. So that's the nonprofit, and all of those we buy, renovate, and sell them. So those a lot of the time are these situations where they've been empty for 10 years, 40 years, buying from a bank, that kind of thing. And then I do some work for homeowners just to fill in as a builder for my company. So
Great, thank you. Somebody is asking if we would be able to get copies of your slides. Would I be able to distribute those to
Sure.
our people?
Yep, that's fine with
Okay.
me.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions here?
I'm not sure which of you wants to respond to this, but when homes were part of the Sanborn Fire Insurance maps, were those maps continued as to decades later? When did they stop doing the maps? And the other part of that question is, were homes that were built in the 20s, the 1920s, required to have building permits? Would those records be available in City Hall?
Would you like me to take this one? Okay. So for your first question there, the Sanborn fire maps were created for insurance purposes. That's why they're a wealth of information. They usually include the materials that the buildings were made out of, not only being able to trace when they pop up on the map. So for Holland, I believe the last map we have is either from I think it's from 1925, maybe it's in the 20s. And so we don't have any maps after that point. And that's, I believe, also when the Sanborn maps kind of fall out of fashion, or using them more modern practices at the time come into play. But for Holland, I think our first one is 1885. Is there a 74? Okay, there might be a map. I don't think there's a Sanborn map that close to the fire. I think it's maybe 1889. Oh, there's somewhere in there. But I do use them occasionally to check dates, like Amy said, because our surveys sheets will have one date, the city assessor's office will have another, and then usually the truth is somewhere in between. So does that kind of maybe answer your question a little bit there about the maps themselves? And then as for, can you remind me what the second part? For building permits as far back as the 20s? No, I mean, there might have been, and maybe Amy can speak more to what that process was like then. But as far as city records, we don't, our records don't go back that far.
Yeah, I don't know the answer of when building permits became a thing. I just know that this BSA online system that I'm talking about and that I have a screenshot of, you can usually see property transfers just back into the 80s. I don't think I ever recall anything before 1980. So I think that's when they started this system of automating everything and keeping track of it. So I have never looked back and seen property transfers or building permits or anything before the 1980s.
Was there any pictures or information on buildings between the 1920s and 1960s?
1920s to 19.
I don't know where to look for that.
I would direct you towards the resources at the Holland Museum or at the library for research like that. On the city level, most of our photographs are through the property assessing department, and they're far more recent than photographs sort of what we think of as the period of significance, the time of these homes. So for example, most of my photographs, the earliest ones, are what we have on the survey sheets, and those aren't that long ago. This is the 1980s and the 1990s, and so they're a really great resource to have. But when I'm looking to try and find an original photograph of the home, I myself go to the museum as a resource. So that's what I would recommend in that case.
And unless they changed it, it's been a number of years since I've tried to do that, but not growing up as a historian or knowing how to do these things, I thought I'd just walk over to the museum and ask them for some pictures of 240 West 9th over the years. And they just hand over this handy file and say, here you go.
Oh,
And
wow.
that's not the case. So they don't catalog them by address or every address, certainly, because you wouldn't. Even now, it's not like I'd think to go take a picture of my house and give it to somebody at a museum, thinking 100 years from now, somebody might want to know that. So
Yeah, there's usually some digging involved. And on the Holland Museum's website, they have resources. And I mean, again, I'm not affiliated with them at all, so I don't want to lead you astray, but they've been very helpful when I've had questions. Also, they have some of their collections and images digitized online that you can look at. So again, sometimes the homes don't have an address on them, but if you're looking for a specific property, you can scan through and there'll be some recognizable buildings.
As far as pictures of Holland, I know the Holland Sentinel has an amazing photographic archive. They might not have houses unless somebody famous was arrested there, so they made the newspapers or something. But it might be, I don't know how well the Holland Sentinel has their photo archives cataloged and whatnot, but
Yeah, that's not something I'm
all these-
familiar with.
all these ideas. Any other questions? I know that Anna was telling me that before she came to Holland, she was working in Cooperstown, New York, famous for baseball, and that you cannot move to Cooperstown, New York without being in a historic district. The entire city is solid historic district.
That it
So
is.
don't even think about trying to buy a house in Cooperstown where you won't be under the historic committee. And we were exchanging ideas about the fact that Congress hasn't given the National Historic Register or historic committees from Congress the authority to go around and police things. That's all up to the local will to do that. It's really does get back. Is that the way you would put it? I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Yeah,
but-
as long as, again, this is what we talked about last week. Once federal money becomes involved, then there can be some oversight. But yeah, again, the National Register is more of a recognition of a historic place and less of a protection of that place.
Okay, so if federal money ever funded repairs or anything for that house, they're on the hook then for historic preservation?
So then they undergo, it's very formal sounding, but a Section 106 review with the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation. So it's basically the federal level of going to our Historic District Commission, where there's review, input from interested parties, both locally and then where the construction might be taking place, but then also at the federal level, that becomes involved.
Okay. I was also wondering myself, I found from experience that a lot of times people overestimate what it costs to do foundation repair. Sometimes they think, oh my God, I could never buy a house that has anything wrong with the foundation. Can you comment on that about what is or is not going to sink your ship in that?
I would say that we Homecourt work on a number of homes that have 100-year-old foundations, and you walk across the floor and it's very wavy, and we write that off to the charm of a old home. And we don't do anything heroic to fix the foundation because it's most likely something that happened 80 years ago and is never gonna be a problem. So we'll inspect it. And I guess my answer to your question is a lot of the time we're not going back and addressing the foundation. We're making sure it's stable and all of that, but we're not trying to take out every little bit of wave in a floor. And our buyers recognize that because it really is kind of the charm of an old home. If you wanted perfection, you would not be looking at these homes.
But you're saying usually it's not structurally significant. It doesn't
Correct.
mean your floor is going to collapse. It's just,
Yep.
and can you shim it out? Can you go down and do?
Yeah,
shims
so a
and
lot of the
stuff?
time we will, if the slope is just too much to write off as charm, we'll address it from the top side cosmetically instead of doing something to the foundation. So it's shimming up the floor before we lay new flooring down. So in that case, we can't reuse the old wood floors, but we'll do something on the top side to make it feel better underfoot. But then there are also a lot of foundation fixes that are just cosmetic or little cracks, or even there's a lot of modern ways to fix bowed walls with what are called helicals. So you can basically spiral into the earth and pull the wall back into place. those are very,
Whoa,
those are
that sounds
very
good.
expensive.
Oh.
So that gets into the
Okay.
tens of thousands of dollars to do that, but that's very, very rare. Like of the 50 homes, I think we've done that once where
Mhm.
we had to do a section of wall and stabilize it. So,
But having, my husband and I lifted a home in New Jersey, and that was built in 1795. And in lifting that home, I learned before we lifted it, that they come to lift it, not level it. When they lift it, those, 25 or 30 jacks that are all synchronized under the house that are going to raise those beams, they're not going to level it. And it would be a terrible idea if they tried to, because all your door jambs and windows would be out of line and your chimney would probably crack and so forth. They lift it without leveling it. So isn't that amazing?
yeah,
That they, first of all, that they can get the jacks coordinated that well.
yeah.
How many jacks did they put under the house on 9th Street when they did lift it? Do you remember?
It wasn't that many. I think it was 6 because the big steel beams that they use go all the way through. So they
Yeah.
just need a few points to put those under.
Okay.
And in this case, raising it up and setting it back down on a level surface took care of basically all the floor unevenness that we had.
Oh, it did for
Yeah.
that house. Oh,
Yeah.
that's interesting.
Because the wooden, and your house may have been constructed differently, but the wooden plate that the studs are resting on, once that had a level place to sit, everything just kind of worked itself out.
Interesting.
So, and
Okay.
if we weren't touching anything inside, there would be plaster cracks and doorways that would be out of whack. But because we were kind of doing all that stuff interior to change the house anyway, it was a different story. So we didn't have to worry
Okay.
about the cracks and stuff that were gonna happen because it was now level where it wasn't before.
I was sure we would have to take the chimney down. I mean, I was worried about the chimney, just thinking about it, but
Mhm.
they lifted 2 chimneys with hardly any cracks. I mean, they just were,
Yeah.
were the jacks so carefully synchronized that, I mean, they would just lift it, not even 1/8 of an inch off of what they were trying to do,
Well,
or not really.
So this was 2 brothers from Pullman, Tim and Tom. And it's the only time I've ever lifted a home. So, and it was this summer. So of course I had all the questions and I wanted to meet them there and I wanted to
yeah.
know how you did this and how you did that. And they were kind of not all about that. they were like, I'm asking
Just
where.
leave it to us.
I'm asking exactly where the beams are gonna go and where is this gonna, and they're just like, lady, we're showing up with 2 beams that go somewhere here, 4 that go somewhere there. Then we're gonna, jack it up. It's gonna go a little wonky when we set it back down. It'll be fine. And I'm asking for, assurance, and they're like, they're house movers. So they're used to moving these houses down the road. So just lifting it up in place and setting it back down to them is no big deal. And this is a tight city lot. I mean, this is a 47-foot wide lot with houses on each side. So they did not have a lot of room for those 60-foot beams to maneuver, and they got it done. But they were not like having a little seminar with me to explain every step of the process or the intricacies of raising it inch by inch. They were just like, you leave us alone, we'll take care of it. So they were very nice by the end, but they were, they were not high on providing information.
You want another one?
Sure. I think
What
we have
about
one
the
more.
commercial districts? Washington Square being one and 8th Street being another area with real charm. And are property owners there interested at all in what you're doing?
So on 8th Street, that is one of the National Register historic districts. And we know we've talked quite a bit about the differences between that and the local. I haven't heard of much interest bringing in some of the local downtown. Of course, we would the local oversight to downtown, though we would, of course, love to see it. There have been questions, and I've had some of the property owners on 8th Street come to me as they're doing updates and renovations, seeing, is this historically appropriate or not? Would you suggest this over that, sort of on more of an informal consulting sort of way? And so that makes me really excited to see that even though technically on 8th Street, they do not have to follow the guidelines that we've created for the historic districts. They're still interested in maintaining a lot of the historic character of many of the buildings. Also, if some of you might have heard over the summer, the zoning ordinance for the city of Holland was updated. We now have the Unified Development Ordinance, the UDO as it's called. And as part of that, property owners on 8th Street, if they're going to be doing major exterior renovations, have to have a little sit-down meeting with both myself and our senior city planners to sort of talk about historically what are the important aspects of this building that we would like to see preserved over time. Now, they don't, they can take and do with that as they will, but it's still sort of acknowledged that you are the steward of this historic building. For Washington Square, that hasn't come across my way at all so far. But again, you're right. It's another area with a lot of charm and a lot of character. And it's something I think, we'd be interested in looking into more.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you, Amy. This has been a terrific session, and I'm sure we could go on and on with our questions and curiosity about where this could go. But thanks for the interest that everyone showed in participating in the class. Let us know if you have reactions or questions moving forward for either Amy or Anna or for me. And treasure Holland's historic treasure of wonderful, even though often humble homes, not mansions. We don't have that many mansions in Holland, but we have very, very beautiful homes. So thank you for appreciating and studying this with us.